Welcome to our CNS seminar today. My name is Robert Shaw. I direct the Export Control and Non-Proliferation Program for CNS, and I'm very pleased to be moderating today's program, which will feature my colleague, Mr. Hyuk Kim, who's a research fellow also with CNS's Export Control and Non-Proliferation Program. And I imagine many of you are going to be relieved to hear that although Hyuk and myself are part of the Export Control and Non-Proliferation Program here, this program really is not going to be focused on export controls. But I'll use that as a frame for Hyuk's presentation today, in that export controls are sometimes generously ascribe sort of an expectation of even being a solution for non-proliferation and international security issues. And practitioners in the export control space are always kind of quick to note that actually it's certainly not the case. At best, export controls may slow down or impede illicit transfers of technologies, or serve as frameworks for awareness of the dual-use nature of technologies, particularly those that may benefit WMD applications. And the theory here is that in this respect, export controls may offer an opening, a space for consideration and work on more comprehensive solutions. And it's sort of this arena that has garnered the interest of Hyuk in his recent research, which also applies machine learning tools. And the focus here is, in the title of this of Hyuk's seminar, is Strategic Empathy for North Korea: Exploring Policy Implications at the Intersection of Machine Learning and Nuclear Diplomacy. And so this is a much broader picture than the arena that, let's say, our day-to-day work in the export control program delves into, as you will see. Before handing the floor over to Hyuk, I do want to give kind of a proper sort of a sketch or outline of his work and professional experience that has informed his research. Presently, Hyuk is a research fellow with CNS's Export Control and Non-Proliferation Program. He's also an alum of the Institute, having received a master's in non-proliferation and terrorism studies here. And as part of his it's sort of an extension of his graduate work, this included some time at the IAEA. Prior to his graduate studies, Hyuk worked with the multinational corporation Daewoo in South Korea. And among his responsibilities was sort of navigating the non-proliferation sanctions compliance environment for his particular business unit at Daewoo. After his studies at the Institute, Hyuk worked as a guest researcher with the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, or SIPRI, in Stockholm. And also worked as a research fellow, specifically non-proliferation and nuclear security fellow at Pacific Forum, before rejoining us here at CNS. So Hyuk's perspective on these issues is informed by experiences with international organizations, with the private sector, and with NGOs, particularly those working in the non-proliferation space. More recently, and as a segue to his talk, Hyuk's research has sort of delved into the application of AI tools, and particularly machine learning. And this goes beyond just sort of an interest in let's say, the policy dimension of AI and machine learning, to the level where Hyuk has, in his own time, acquired a TensorFlow developer certificate. So he has credentials as a developer in the AI space, and thus kind of brings that sort of technical perspective to the use of these tools, which you'll see these types of AI-related analytical tools in his presentation today. So without further ado, be pleased to hand the floor to Hyuk, and thank you so much, Hyuk, for presenting on this topic today.
Thank you so much, Robert, for your very kind introduction. So, as you know, my name is Hyuk Kim. It's a great honor to have opportunity to present my research work today. So thank you for all of your time here today. Also, I also recognize some of my friends in the guest list, as well as also Jenny Tang, who is also director of the 30 North program. So she's one of the leading experts on North Korean issues, and I know most of your students have taken open source information classes, or you're working on satellite imagery analysis and so forth. So if you found anything really related to North Korea and have any insightful analysis, then please share with me and I can facilitate it. So today's topic is strategic empathy. So by definition, strategic empathy means that stepping into the enemy's mindset to understand their interests and motivations so that the policymakers can have better prediction of the enemy's behavior in order to prepare the good policy for that. So several months ago, CNS hosted a seminar on strategic empathy, mostly focusing on Russian issues, but today's main focus is North Korea. So before beginning, I would like to conduct a quick survey for everyone in this room. So my question is, how many UN member states do you think agree with the United States on the issues related to nuclear weapons and non-proliferation issues in general? So there's no definite answer for that. So please raise your hand. So first, less than half of the UN member state.
Less than half agree.
Okay, then almost half of the UN member state agree with the United States. There's no wrong and right answer. But you will see the answer in the middle of the presentation. And more than half. All right, so let's see. So before beginning, since not all people here has nuclear policy background, so I just would like to briefly explain some concept that I'm gonna keep talking about. So first of all, non-aligned movement is a group of states who decide not to take the side in great power, especially during the Cold War time period. So mostly it has about 120 states belongs to that group, and North Korea is also part of it. So Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, or called NPT, is an international treaty, almost universal treaty that states promise not to develop nuclear weapons under this treaty. And under this treaty, only 5 states, France, United States, United Kingdom, China, and Russia are entitled to have nuclear weapons. So negative security assurance is the concept that as a state who do not have nuclear weapon, you insist you should not be a target of potential nuclear threat by another state having nuclear weapons. So NSA. So I'm gonna keep talking about this acronym continuously. Also for the convenience, when I explain about certain statistical terms, I've tried to simplify so that my explanation may not be 100% technically correct, but it generally captures the most essence of the methodologies. So today's seminar has 4 elements. First, background. In this part, I'm going to explain why I chose today's theme as a strategic empathy, and then what kind of goals I want to achieve under that theme. Also, how I'm going to approach the topic to attain that goals. So later in part 1, I'm going to share the quantitative analysis that shows how the UN member states are aligned with one another for the nuclear issues. And then based on the findings from that part 1, I'm going to validate it through the qualitative investigation in part 2. And based on the lessons learned throughout this analytical process, I'm going to apply those to the Korean Peninsula cases and talk about some policy implications. So let's start. So why I chose strategic empathy? So I would like to share some of my personal anecdotes that explains my interest in this topic. So I was born and raised in military family. So this upbringing kind of instilled in me some traditional values such as loyalty and dedication to your family, friends, and my country. So this kind of experience shaped my worldview that at the time I thought protecting my country from the enemy or the promoting US-South Korea alliance or promoting nuclear security to the global is a kind of, I thought it was that kind of policy was serving the global interest or international peace. But however, since for the decade long of my professional experience in field of non-proliferation, I was very fortunate to have a lot of capacity building and outreach activities where I was able to exchange different views and opinions with people from various backgrounds in terms of nationalities, ideologies, or social governance systems, or religions, and so forth. So this experience kind of expanded my horizon of my worldview that makes me ask myself like certain questions like you can see in this slide, there's so many questions. I still haven't found any definite answer to these questions, but try to understand the other side from their perspective, why their worldview has been shaped in this way. So for instance, during our workshop to promote non-proliferation in Southeast Asia, one of my colleagues said, nuclear security, safety, and non-proliferation are good for everyone. Why don't you work on hard on it? Well, the general sentiment of the training were not really welcoming that statement because each country has their own national social imperatives, but they have to prioritize that to which they have to put more resources on it to solve those problems first. So in case of United States and its allies, we tend to identify our values and our non-proliferation standard with those of others, so that we tend to presume that our standard represent the international standard. So let's apply to Korean Peninsula case. We often hear a certain argument that someone saying, giving North Korea an opportunity for economic development may lead to North Korea giving up its nuclear weapons program. But is that argument valid or based on what ground? Isn't it a wish dream that we want to make North Korea believe what we think desirable is good for them? We have to think about it. So in my opinion, this is very important to understand North Korean narrative from their threat perception and from their worldview, what their frustrations are. By doing so, we can really identify what kind of things we have missing in dealing with North Korea. By the way, for your reference, if you see any paragraph quoted without any reference, then that is either from E.H. Carr's 20 Years Crisis or What is History. So the goal is, there are two goals. The one minor goal is to use machine learning techniques to apply it to some policy studies. But I try not to overkill it by employing some fancy deep neural network. Rather, I found some simple technique that can serve today's purpose. Of course, as I mentioned, in terms of policy-oriented purpose, the major goal is to understand North Korea from their perspective by specifically focusing on the regime and institutions and law. And we identify some area that we have been missing in dealing with North Korea, so that hopefully we can find a certain area for the progress in the future. So my approach will be teleological, and I'll try to make it as objective as possible. So here's a background why I chose that. It's a little bit too simplified dichotomy view about South Korean politics involving North Korea. But there are there's two lines of approach. One is hardline approach, so-called realist. So people who advocate for the hardline approach in North Korea, such as strengthening sanctions or strengthening US-RK alliance and nuclear posture and so on, most of their worldview has been shaped by their observations or their experience that involves the aftermath of the Korean War or the North Korean military provocation that caused casualties in not only military personnel, but also South Korean civilians. So we can say that their source of wisdom are based on the practice, their observation, or their experience. Meanwhile, the other side, mostly advocated for the so-called sunshine policy, their view is that by promoting economic and cultural exchange with North Korea, they may bring about certain spillover effect in the issues in the military domain. For instance, by promoting the economic exchange with North Korea, maybe can lead to somewhat more environment where it's conducive to talk to North Korea, they can solve the nuclear problem. So we call this line of approach as a so-called functionalism. It's a functionalism is basically international relations academic theory that is support idea of this integration between the state through the economic and cultural exchanges. But my critique goes to both sides. Let's start with the functionalism. So from statistical point of view, functionalism is exposed to the problem of overfitting. What it means is that investigator collected so limited number of the cases so that the model or their theory based on these cases lose relevance to, it cannot apply to general applications. For instance, most of advocates with this approach give the evidence as a European integration in early 20th centuries or the German unification as an example. However, let's look at it from the statistical point of view. Then when you investigate more cases where, let's say, your day-to-day diplomatic operations are centered around promoting your national security, then you may find that if you locate those cases into the graph on the right side, then your linear model that you build may not hold. It's not valid. So the thing is, the problem is not lies in the theory itself. Academic theory is really helpful, especially when you do not understand certain phenomena, it gives us explanation. But problem lies in the people who promote their policy based on this theory as a justification tool. Because let's say you want to use the certain model that has 50% of accuracy for the future prediction, then you may not want to use it in reality, such model. So, however, the strengths of the dysfunctionalism approach, the advocates are their strength is they identify the problem and they are good at identify the desired end state so that society can make a progress. Good comment. So, for instance, South Korean former President Moon Jae-in says when he talk about North Korea with former President Trump, he said it is difficult to make progress in history without any hope. So you can see their source of the reason lies in the aspiration. And also now critique goes to realists too, because they may identify so many cases that why we should not trust North Korea. But however, let's say you built a really nice statistical model to predict the future with a 95% of the accuracy, which means that there's a 5% of small chance that something unexpected case can happen. So we call outlier or anomaly. So this line of approach tend to be very rigid and stick to their experience that already exists so that they lack the motivations to make a change what they already have. So in sum, it was quite long introduction, but I still want to believe that there's certain room for making progress in terms of North Korean nuclear issues. So it becomes a teleological. So we should look for a certain area for cooperation with North Korea, hoping that it can lead to certain resolution in the military domain. However, such approach should be as objective as possible instead of having wish lists. So here's a summary. Today's topic is strategic empathy. And I hope there's still addressing North Korean nuclear program is not a lost cause yet. So our goal is to find out potential cooperation area with North Korea, and then such analytical process should be as objective as possible. So let's move on to quantitative analysis part. So I'm going to briefly explain about methodologies and then share the outcome with you, and also give you some of the North Korean narratives examples that can help their narrative, their worldview. So I used unsupervised learning. So it's one of the subfield of the machine learning. So unsupervised learning uses a data set that do not have the label attached by the engineer. So the primary purpose of unsupervised learning is to identify the pattern that we may not have noticed yet existing in the data point. Meanwhile, as a comparison, the supervised learning for your reference uses data with a label that is attached by the investigator. For instance, you want to establish a certain model that can classify whether a certain country is democratic or not. Then, what kind of label would you put? Singapore depends on your emphasis on civil rights or the leadership type. Then the label is the one that preconceives the notion or your bias can be introduced. That's why I chose unsupervised learning. So methodology is a hierarchical clustering analysis. I'm going to discuss it shortly. And data is, I collected data from, especially that concerns voting record for the resolutions adopted at the UN General Assembly between 1957 and 2001. And for today's purpose, I use a time frame between 2015 and 2021. It is just because at the time I was studying what has been changed between two NTPT review conferences. So, but if you're interested to see the more longer term perspective, you can go to my Kaggle webpage here, and you can manipulate the number per year and see what the outcome is. But I guarantee that you will not find a significant difference from what I'm going to present today, which means that countries' core interest doesn't really change over the time. So in terms of methodology, after I collected those voting record, I converted voting record into numeric value. Let's say voting in favor was converted to 1, abstention is 0.5, and vote against correspond to 0. So that by doing so, we can make a coordinate for each state of position. For instance, let's say there are two resolutions, resolution A and resolution B, and the country one voted in favor for the resolution A, so it's number 1. And for that country abstain from the voting for the resolution B, so it becomes 0.5. So coordinate for the country 1 is a 1, 0.5, very simple. And that same approach goes to country 2. Then we can locate their position in the two-dimensional space. On the right side, the x-axis indicates the voting record for the resolution A, and y-axis indicates the voting record for resolution B. We already know the coordinate, so we can locate those two countries in this two-dimensional space. Also, we can also calculate the two states distance, as you can see from the yellow dotted plot. Next step is clustering. So now let's assume that we have a voting record for 5 countries, and then we have for the 3 resolutions. That means we are looking into 3 dimensional space because there's a three axes that indicate voting record for each resolution, right? And after we located 5 countries position in this 3-dimensional space, we start clustering analysis. By the way, so it involves more statistical method, but I try to simplify so it may not 100% accurate the way I explained today. So first, we cluster the countries that are closely located first. For instance, you see the green and blue dot, their distance is 0.5, so they are very closely located, so they're clustered first. Meanwhile, yellow and purple are also, their distance is also 0.5, so they are clustered at the same time. But red dot is a little bit further from those states, so it is not clustered yet. Then how do we cluster red dots? So basically, red dot will be clustered with a group that its distance is closer than other groups. So we continue this process until every 193 UN member states are grouped into 1. And then we convert that process into you can see graph on the right side, which is called dendrogram. So you can see the process corresponds to what we did. on the bottom, is the blue and green dot, they're closer together. And then the next, and so the next state was closer with the red dot. And eventually we can go over to one. One thing that important I would like to emphasize is that the horizontal line, or I would say branching point, the higher the branching point, then there's more dissimilarity, level of dissimilarity within that group. For instance, when you group as every 193 state into the one group, it's very obvious that the similarity existing within one group is very high. So that you can see in the red color of the line, the branching point is really high up there. Meanwhile, the blue and green color, their similarity very low since their branching point is very low. So this is the outcome of the clustering analysis that involves 193 UN member states. I know I need to zoom in, but before I zoom in, is there anyone who knows something from here, the major general trend or any?
There's two major groups.
Oh yeah, that's defining.
I assume the one on the right is the non-aligned movement.
There is also a division within that big chunk group. So the set of groups on the right, divided by that top cluster, also have another significant branching point.
Exactly. So let's see. First, we can divide into one group, two groups. You can see in the top branching point, the horizontal line. First of all, the branching point is really high, which means that to put every country into one group, there are too much dissimilarity exists within that group. But when you break into the two groups, then it's decreased significantly. That means that there are two major political factions exist within the international community, especially for the nuclear issues. Also, from the survey, many of you said that there could be half and half. Half of the UN member states may agree with what United States talk about the non-proliferation. While this one shows that two political factions, one is very minority, and the other one on the other side, there's the rest of the world. So let's zoom in the minority first. The minority group, marked with the blue box, you can see from the left, Russian Federation, France, United Kingdom, Israel, and the United States. So mostly nuclear weapon state under the NPT, except China, are closely related, even if they have lots of frictions, political frictions. But when it comes to whether you give a nuclear weapon or not, they're in the same case. Also, the rest of it are mostly member states of the NATO or European Union, depending on where the conversation. Oh, one thing you should keep in mind that this is not the reflection of the intention of the state to align one another. It's purely based on their voting record, so it could be incidental or coincidence. Then the other side, the majority group, as you can see, also their branching point is also relatively higher than any others, which means that there could be also two groups within the majority group. You can see the yellow box is the majority within the majority, and the blue box is minority within the majority. And as you identify, the majority group, the yellow box, is mostly consists of the group of non-aligned movement states. And the blue box, the small one, is where the North Korea is located, together with India, China, and Pakistan. Then we have to think about how many political factions exist within the international community. I know this may look complicated, but I'm going to explain quickly. So the x-axis means the number of groups, which means that we can break down the group into 193 groups, right? Each individual becomes one group. The y-axis means the level of dissimilarity. So basically, what it means is that as we disaggregate into the more groups, then the level of dissimilarity decreases. So you can see from the top left, the first dot is the one that when we put every country into one group, so level of dissimilarity is very significantly high. The second dot you see around the 20. But however, when you disaggregate into two groups, two major political factions, then the level of dissimilarity existing in each group, sum of each group, is very low. And you can see it keep decreasing. Then the elbow method means that by rule of thumb, we choose an angular point in this graph, or the so-called elbow point. So what it means is that beyond that elbow point, it is meaningless to break down into the more groups, since the amount of decrease in the level of dissimilarity is very minimal. So there's no point. Let's say you break into 193 group of the international community, then each country becomes a one group, then it doesn't tell us anything. Of course, if some investigator may focus on order of magnitude, how much it decreases, then that person may say, actually, there are 3 or 4 political factions exist within the international community. So then this is based on the elbow method. There are 9 political factions within the global community. As you can see, Group A consists of China, North Korea, India, and Pakistan. And Group 9 consists of France, Israel, Russia, United Kingdom, and the United States. Also, interestingly, in Group 4, you notice that Austria, Ireland, Sweden, and Switzerland, who claim to be their neutral state. So at this point, maybe I have some question to Dr. Porter. So based on your extensive experience in nuclear diplomacy, so does this grouping reflect the reality that you observe?
Yeah, first of all, my eyesight is such that I have a hard time recognize. I can't really read the groupings there, and I need to be careful how I respond because typically the more deeper you dig, the more variations you find, and so it's not always helpful to make kind of general statements. I mean, there are a number of formal regional and political groupings, and some of them probably correspond fairly closely to the groups that you have. But there are also all kinds of misnomers that are not reflected. These groupings have an impact, say, on the non-proliferation process, so that you can anticipate shares different and models. There's a distribution between the Western and other group and the Eastern. But the so-called Eastern group is a misnomer, since most of the Eastern group members are members of NATOs. So what does that mean? Then you look at the so-called non-aligned movement, you gave a definition of the non-aligned movement. But today, the Russian Federation and China are observers to the non-aligned movement. And in fact, if you count the observer states, there are more nuclear weapons possessors on the part of the non-aligned movement than any of the other political groups that need. So, I mean, I'm trying to connect the known, the formal regional political groupings to discern through some kind of buffer and factor analysis. And there's considerable overlap, but then you really have to put it, and I don't mean to make it so complicated than it is, but you really have to ask what are the questions that we are looking at. And if you're talking about the NPT, well, the NPT has 3 pillars. So you may find more clustering on the disarmament pillar. You may be able to predict better. Then when you get to peaceful use, pillar 3, you may find a divergence in use. And I mean, always point to kind of counterfactuals. To give you, an example. Not that long ago, during your time frame here, there were discussions that were related to the whole question of whether a working group should be set up to deal with questions having to do with what became the TPLW.
Exactly.
And yet, and the leader of the non-aligned movement at that time was involved. And yet, the majority of non-aligned movement states supported Mexico and Austria in their position, while Iran, the technical lead of the non-aligned movement, was supported by the most of the nuclear states. So it's hard, I'm very uncomfortable generalizing, particularly since I've just seen this, for a few moments. So, it's, I think, an interesting exercise, and it would be worthwhile to, ponder more closely the groups that you discern and how they correspond to the formally recognized groups, and I suspect there'll be more overlap with respect to some of those groupings than with others. So I don't mean to shy away from your question,
No.
but my natural tendency is to avoid generalizations.
Of course.
Because, we've been involved in some of these things, we see all kinds of discontinuities where, from, 10 miles up, it may look like there's more similarities than differences. So that's all I can say.
So
I'm pleased to look at this more closely, and then you can ask me the question again, maybe I'm.
Yeah, sure.
the answer.
So the key point is, you see, that actually, relying too much on the quantitative research may not sometimes feel really practical or something that applicable to our reality. So I'm going to discuss very soon. So before talk about how North Korea may see such things, we have to think about, let's say we cannot discuss all aspects, every aspect of North Korean worldview, but since it's about non-proliferation regime, we have to look into maybe focus on laws and institutions. So do you support the idea, the rule of law, or the rule-based international order? It sounds very appealing phrase, but in reality, it's a dominant or stronger state who are always in a better position to create the regime and impose on others to maintain the social and international order. And usually that order serves better interests of those dominant group, so that they tend to say law must be kept to the other state. But at the same time, we should not fall into the fallacy that laws are legal, more like moral than the politics. So laws are just legal, but not necessarily always moral. By saying the rule of law, we put ourselves to the subject of the law. At the same time, we are the one who make the law. The law is not always made by someone good or nice. So of course, it reflects a certain sense of justice or purpose of international peace. However, that is a reflection of a certain sense of justice deemed by a particular group at a certain time. There is really hard to find the permanent absolute standard for judging good and bad. So North Korea does not necessarily share the similar views. So there are so many cases where you can find the North Korean narratives at the UN that basically saying the US emphasis on rule-based international order is serving current international order that serves US national security better. So also another example is in 1993, when North Korea was struggled with a non-compliance issue with International Atomic Energy Agency's safeguard agreement. North Korea claimed that the IAEA safeguard policy and implementation were heavily influenced by the United States national security interests that antagonize North Korea. So they are getting unjust treatment from the IAEA. It's from North Korean point of view, it's not my argument. Also, laws, institutions are not always moral. Let's say having nuclear weapon bad thing or good thing?
Bad thing.
And then can law decide whether having nuclear weapon is good or bad? So putting this way, North Korea's frustration that their non-compliance with a non-proliferation obligation, only that one is projected into ethical domain, while the lack of the progress in disarmament is justified in the practical domain. So for instance, NATO and the US allies said, oh, we endorse the Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. We support that, but for the our unique security challenges, presumably that involves China and Russia, so we cannot endorse this treaty yet. So likewise, North Korea always blames those behavior as a hypocrisy. At the same time, North Korea, let's say, also you can see in the bottom here, is French representative saying that nuclear weapons are safe and good when they're in that country, and it's threatening and bad when it's in the others. So you can see like whether you should think about whether law can decide someone is good or bad. Why, if having nuclear weapons is a bad thing, then why United States or France are not blamed, morally blamed for the having nuclear weapons? Why India is not blamed for the having nuclear weapons? Then if someone certified those things based on the NPT status, then North Korean nuclear is also legal issues, not the moral issues. Maybe we perceive it as immoral because of North Korean nuclear weapons threat us. Meanwhile, the rest of the world may not see really seen as a threat to their national security. So we have to think about whether this law is legal, this law is moral. So let me conclude the quantitative part first. So this is a bilateral angle. So it basically shows the distance from North Korea. So out of 193 UN member states, the United States is the furthest state from North Korea, which means that we are trying to solve the most challenging diplomatic problem with North Korea. Meanwhile, interestingly, Japan is relatively close to North Korean position. Why? So if you're looking into the voting record data, the closest one means they support more of that resolution narrative. So Japan and North Korea, in general, they support the resolution concerning threat or use of nuclear weapons. That means the negative security assurance. And then our initial purpose was finding potential area for cooperation with North Korea. So can we promote diplomatic cooperation with North Korea in this area between Japan and North Korea? Let's see.
Can I just ask a question? Make sure I understand this. So the indicators for distance are not based upon the voting record overall, but are just with respect to issues having to do with North Korea.
No, just it's overall. Every
Also
include both peaceful use of nuclear weapons, disarmament, and non-proliferation.
Okay.
So let's validate our findings through the qualitative investigations. I'm going to discuss, since not all of us have nuclear policy background, so I'm going to briefly describe all the concepts related to it. And also then I'll compare the Japan's and North Korean perspective on negative security assurance. And also as a benchmarking purpose, because non-aligned movements are the majority of the international society, so that I'm going to give what the position of the non-aligned movement state on NSA issues. So as I mentioned, negative security assurance is one that non-nuclear weapon state does not become a victim of the nuclear threat by the state having nuclear weapons. But during the NPT negotiation period, United States and former Soviet Union could not reach the consensus on the phrase concerning the negative security assurance, because at the time, Soviet Union proposed that beneficiary or recipient of the NSA by the nuclear weapon state should be the non-nuclear state who does not have nuclear weapons in their territory. But at the same time, United States deployed a nuclear weapon in West Germany at the time, so the US opposed such an NSA clause. So eventually they failed to include NSA into the NPT draft text. Instead, you can see the positive security assurance at the top. So UN Security Council adopted Resolution 255 that requires immediate action or aid for the non-nuclear weapon state who fall victim to nuclear threat by the nuclear weapon state. But this was not satisfactory for the state who do not have nuclear weapons, since, as we know, the permanent members of the UN Security Council are the ones who has nuclear weapons, and they have veto power for any resolutions. So it does not guarantee the non-nuclear weapon states their security. So we talked about positive security assurance and negative security assurance. So non-aligned movement, especially, they continue to pursue the NSA from nuclear weapon state, and eventually 5 nuclear weapon states announced their promise not to use nuclear weapons against non-nuclear weapon state in 1978. And also they reaffirmed that in 1995 as part of the extension of NPT. But most of them are just unilateral political statement that has a lot of reservation, like exceptional cases. For instance, in the case of the United States, the country stated that Washington will not use a nuclear weapon against non-nuclear weapon state who are party to the NPT, except when the state attacks US or its allies in association with the other nuclear weapon states. So when you apply the Korean Peninsula, let's say the example is, if North Korea attacks South Korea only involving conventional weapons without China knowing about it, then North Korea still can be a target of US nuclear strike. That's how the legal expert interpreted this US NSA policy. Also, some people interchangeably use a positive security assurance with alliance commitment. Actually, they're different concept. So alliance commitment is a purpose. So you can simply say it's a nuclear umbrella given to select non-nuclear states such as US extended deterrence provide to NATO, Japan, and South Korea. So the non-nuclear weapon state, especially non-aligned movement, recognize their pursuit of NSA as a legitimate interest since they gave up their right to pursue the nuclear weapon, and especially as a part of consideration of their national defense strategy by joining the NPT. So that they need certain security guarantee from the nuclear weapon state. So that's why they pursue the NSA and they recognize this reasonable right. At the same time, they need legally binding and unconditional NSA. So as you know, as I said, all of the NSA promises given by the nuclear weapon state probably near political commitment with the last three sessions. You can see more details from this article later. So let's look into Japan's position. Japan doesn't actually really specify their position on NSA. They also recognize that it is the pursuit of the NSA by the non-nuclear weapon state is a legitimate interest. However, Japan specified that the recipient or beneficiary of NSA should be the non-nuclear weapon state that are party to the NPT, also that are in compliance with NPT. Also, they appreciate the US nuclear policy review that include NSA policy, which I'm going to discuss soon. Meanwhile, North Korea insists that there should be legally binding NSA. Also, it should not include any exception, no reservations. And then North Korea specified that beneficiary of the NSA should be the non-nuclear weapon state without specifying the membership status or compliance status with NPT. Also, interestingly, in promoting NSA, North Korea insists the removal of the nuclear umbrella given to US and its allies or some other countries. Presumably, it is only given to a select country, or maybe they think they could be potentially targeted. So if you look into NAM's position, I know this is very wordy, but in a nutshell, the NAM's position, they promote legally binding and unconditional NSA like North Korea. But when it comes to recipient of NSA, potential beneficiary of NSA, NAM specify the non-nuclear weapon state who are party to the NPT. So there's a little difference between North Korean position and NAM's position. Also, NAM also denounced the NATO and the United States nuclear policy review since US nuclear doctrine is based on the deterrence strategy that involves threat of nuclear weapons. So that is by number is a majority view. So it's a simplified comparison of this table. So you can see North Korea and Japan actually, when you look in detail, in every single detail they have divergent point. So let's say someone will only the qualitative analysis and conducted research and go to say, hey, Madam Secretary, I found out that North Korea and Japan may incorporate to promote NSA, then they may not really work. So let's see, but we didn't find anything really solution for the existing problem. It was my proposal. I didn't want my analysis conditioned by my purpose so that I could have any narrative that served my interest. I want to be objective, so it's impossible to promote cooperation between Japan and North Korea. Well, we learned something from this process. So let's apply this to the Korean Peninsula. What does it mean? So I'll go straight to key findings and talk about policy considerations. So assuming that it's not the solving North Korean nuclear weapons program is not a lost cause yet. So first key finding is that the NSA will be one of the core elements in implementing complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula in the future. Why? So every single important nuclear instrument with North Korea include negative security assurance element. For instance, agreed framework in 1994, US promised formal assurance NSA pledges. It's interesting that US actually said a formal assurance at the time. And I'm not sure why not many South Korean experts talk about it, which means the end of the US nuclear umbrella. But at the same time, in the same year, United States said that on the right side, nuclear posture review, nuclear weapon plays a crucial role in deterring non-nuclear weapon states who are armed with chemical and biological weapons. Even if they do not have nuclear weapons, they can be targeted. So during the Clinton administration, the principle of the NSA has been derogated a lot, and it peaked during the Bush administration. So according to 2001 nuclear posture review, it actually specifies several countries, even if at that time those countries did not have nuclear weapons at that time, but the administration said that those countries could be a target of US nuclear strike, and even they enunciated the even possibility of the preemptive strike. And those targets include North Korea as well. So North Korea also noted that nuclear posture review, and next year they said that they have to review the agreement with the United States that includes the agreed framework. Of course, joint statement adopted at the sixth party talks has an NSA elements there, as you can see in the blue highlighted phrase. And during the Obama administration, the United States restored a certain principle of the NSA by saying that US will not use a nuclear weapon against non-nuclear weapon states who are party to the NPT and with a full compliance status with them. Of course, there is a exception the US can make changes on the time basis. Correspondingly, in 2012, North Korea also blamed the US nuclear posture review that basically saying US remain unchanged its aggressive nuclear strategy doctrine against North Korea. Of course, during the US DPRK summit, the joint statement also includes security guarantee to North Korea. At the same time, North Korea in exchange, North Korea promised to come in, fulfill the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. But let's see what it means. And also 2018, during Trump administration, the NSA proposal similar to that of the Obama administration. Then in 2018, North Korea explicitly said that complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula is complete elimination of the US nuclear threat to Korea, as well as for source of nuclear threat. So, as we know, US, South Korea, and Japan believes that CDKP is a unilateral disarmament of North Korea. But however, North Korea has different understanding. So we should not turn the blind eyes to what exists in reality. So we have to think about how we bridge the gap. And second key finding is that there should be unconditional and legally binding NSA given to North Korea in exchange to North Korea's eventual return to the NPT as a non-nuclear state with full compliance status. Why? Anyone knows that phrase on the left? The meaning? No?
They're Googling as we speak.
So basically that means that the prevailing condition when the negotiation was happening, that is gone, so that agreement is not applicable to current situation. So it is kind of doctrine that sometimes when you try not to keep your promise you made from a certain agreement, by saying that simply the situation has been changed. So for instance, 2001, the John Bolton said that he feels the country is no longer bound by its NSA commitment, since he views it as a theoretical assertion, and given the reality that where their nuclear policy did not deter terrorists from attacking the United States, as you can see from 9/11, even if it didn't involve nuclear weapons. Also, it is U.S. current position that the country is not ready to provide a legally binding NSA to other states. At the same time, North Korea stated at the UNGA, or Conference on Disarmament, said that, however, nuclear weapon states are free to reverse what they promised because their NSA pledges are just mere political commitment. It's not legally binding, even with many exceptions. You still not believe it? Then let's look into another evidence. So this is a letter, official letter sent by North Korea to the UN that expressed their intent to withdraw from the NPT in 1993. It basically says that North Korea perceived the US ROK joint military exercise as a part or as an element of US nuclear deterrence given to South Korea. So that if such activity continues, then North Korea views that it's the US intent to legitimize the deterrence strategy, which involves threat of use of nuclear weapon against non-nuclear weapon state. In addition, in 2012, North Korea clarified, of course, they clarified so many times, but the reason why they withdraw from the NPT is that NPT failed to give them the security assurance, especially, for instance, even if North Korea joined the NPT as a non-nuclear weapon state, US nuclear umbrella given to North Korea still persists. So there's no point for North Korea to be a non-nuclear weapon state under the NPT if they are still the potential target of US nuclear strike. So now let's move on to policy considerations. I'll just skip this part. Okay, so we have to think about how we bridge the gap in understanding, different understanding of this conflict nuclearization between peninsula among US and its allies and North Korea. Definitely there's a significant difference. But it will be a very challenging concept. It's not something like some special person comes in and within 5 years, I want to achieve it. It cannot happen. For instance, you see in the graph on the bottom side, it basically tells you that about 70% of South Korean nationals, they want to have unilateral nuclear weapons program. Of course, depending on how we frame the survey question, the result will be different, but it just shows general sentiment. So the thing is, it's really not really easy to change the public sentiment. So it's not the one that some special, let's say, I really have noble idea about the future, I want to make a change. It will not happen within 1 or 5 years. We should take a long-term approach through the, let's say, public outreach, educate the general population of South Korea why the NSA element is important, why there could be certain possibility that end of US nuclear umbrella could be considered in that process in a candid manner. Of course, if someone believes that it is not possible, then maybe you may need to follow the general sentiment. I didn't say what it means. So let's move on to second consideration. So let's look into first some reality. So nuclear weapons free zone in South Asia, so-called Bangkok Treaty, none of the nuclear weapon states did not sign the protocol that guarantees the legally binding NSA for the members in Southeast Asia. From United States point of view, the zone was broadly defined so that it can affect US strategic operations. For example, US nuclear armed vessel goes into the Southeast Asia for the issues related to South China Sea, then this kind of treaty can hinder US strategic operations so that the US did not sign the protocol. Likewise, even if the denuclearization talks start from the bilateral angle between the United States and North Korea, it'll eventually become the regional issues. For instance, giving the North Korea the legally binding NSAs means that end of nuclear umbrella not only given to South Korea, also the nuclear umbrella given to Japan. And then miraculously, South Korea and Japan agree on that, but still, they may have a concern that they could be a potential target of the nuclear threat posed by China and Russia. So South Korea and Japan may need certain legally binding NSA from those two great powers as well. Then it'll be really hard to define the beneficiary zone of the NSA in this case. For instance, how will China or Russia would perceive the military bases located in South Korea and Japan? So we have to think about it. Also, China and Russia may try to minimize the presence of the US strategic asset coming into East Asian region, which US will never sign such an agreement. So there are a lot of work to do, things to consider. It's not just an easy idea. Someone come and, oh, I want to achieve the denuclearization zone in East Asia. It's not that easy. You need to think, look into the reality. Third reality is, as I mentioned, that North Korea was looking into US nuclear policy, even if there's certain promise given to North Korea, as I mentioned. So in the end, if we sign any grand bargaining deal with North Korea, there should be careful management of US strategic doctrine in order not to give the impression to North Korea that US nuclear policy actually contradict what was promised to North Korea. And furthermore, there should be diplomatic effort at the global level. For instance, there are so many non-aligned movement states, they are not rewarded the legally binding NSA, even if they are in good standing with NPT with a full compliance status. They haven't got rewarded yet. However, if North Korea is rewarded legally binding NSA for their non-compliance, then we have to think about whether those non-aligned movements say it's beneficial to stay in the NPT. So basically, when you consider certain policy options, even if your idea is noble or it considers certain very desirable end state, we always should not turn the blind eyes to hard fact. Even if sometimes talking about these hard facts could be make your policies non-starter, but we have to take a long-term perspective when it comes to not only for maybe North Korea, but most of the social policy we devise in the future. So basically, so it's the end of presentation. I'll be happy to receive your critics.
Before I'll just make a comment here before we turn to the questions. I see we already have one hand raised. But Chuck, thank you so much for your presentation. And what I found particularly interesting was you had the quantitative component first, machine learning sort of driven or with respect to your analysis, but then sort of reinforced by just sort of delving into the language of, say, North Korean statements from other states, and looking particularly at the negative security assurances. And so those combined sort of really seem to kind of illustrate this just the gap in positions, let's say, between the United States and looking at that hierarchical clustering, sort of that group to the left of the chart, and then you had that sort of group to the right of the chart as well, and maybe a subgroup there where North Korea lie. And I thought the vertical graph where you had sort of of all the UN member states, based on your data, you had the US on one pole and then North Korea on the other, and so it really your talk really illustrated the amount of work involved. And I'll simply note, in thinking of that hierarchical clustering chart, we're frequently engaging in sort of non-proliferation, export control, capacity awareness, sanctions awareness specific to UN Security Council resolutions. And most of the support that drives that assistance is coming probably from that left side of the chart. And when we're engaging with, let's say, UN member states that are more on that sort of the right clustering, right side of the chart, we hear this. We hear different perspectives. There's a webinar we gave on kind of promoting sanctions compliance with North Korea related non-proliferation UN Security Council resolutions for select states in Africa. And the perspectives that we would hear on this is it's very much focused more on sort of economic considerations, economic reality, and to some extent the Security Council resolutions were seen as almost more of a distant issue, even theoretical. So I couldn't help but think about that when I was looking at the chart. Anyway, just wanted to kind of credit you for a very, very thought-provoking approach. And sort of, I think the findings here do underscore the amount of work involved. I know, so I just want to kind of get an assessment of hands for questions. I saw we have two, Samir and Cooper and Masako and Spencer and Bill. Did you have any?
Barry, let's, I know there are a lot of people, I think, online.
Yeah.
So I'm lost.
Good, very, very good. So, and we'll certainly turn to those online as well. So I guess starting to my left, Samir.
Thank you, Robert. So first off, great presentation. Yeah, I'm a visual learning, so seeing those graphs and charts kind of helped me conceptualize some of the major hurdles we have, as Robert already mentioned. But one of my questions came up with when I was kind of looking through some of the statements that North Korea's made in their kind of the way they legitimize the reasons why a lot of the NPT or the issues with the agreed framework. How much of that do you think is argued in good faith? How much of that do you think is potentially just North Korea using that to weaken US legitimacy and credibility and also gain their own national security interests with regards to their own nuclear development? And does that even matter? I mean, should that just not even be part of the consideration when the US does negotiate with North Korea on these issues, specifically with negative security assurance?
Actually, so there are lots of course, I present this issue from the angle of North Korean perspective, but actually, if you look into their narratives, of course, it logically makes sense, but at the same, there are lots of counter argument what North Korea claims. So, for instance, when North Korea said the team spirit joint military exercise in the US and South Korea as one of the reasons they withdrew from the NPT, actually, their non-compliance case come first, and then in response to that, South Korea and the United States resumed the military exercise. So we cannot. It may be a little bit weak argument that someone say North Korea is purely interested in NSA and that's why they usually do so. Also, they also have what North Korea was blames the Western countries as hypocrisy, but they're saying too. So let's say in terms of NSA, in 2019 at the UN General Assembly, North Korea actually stated that any state could take part in the military action led by the United States would be a target of North Korean nuclear weapon. So even if they pursue NSA, they also make the same mistake by making some other non-nuclear state as a victim of it. Also, when they blame another example is when they blame the NATO's and other countries for the fact that they do not sign the treaty on prohibition of nuclear weapons. Actually, NATO said that because of unique security environment, presumably the threat comes from China and Russia, we cannot endorse this treaty. At the same time, North Korea, they did not sign the treaty, and they said because of unique security environment in the Korean Peninsula, so we cannot sign the treaty. So everyone has they justify their less fulfilling moral goals with practical reasons. Meanwhile, it is easy to blame others based on the moral.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm just going to kind of do a sweep from left to right, inclusive of the online group. So next is Cooper.
Great presentation, yeah, I really enjoyed it. My question is, these AI and machine learning tools are very interesting, obviously on the cutting edge. What is your end goal and what benefits do you see in using these tools over others? And what would you recommend or what advice would you have to anyone who might be thinking of using these tools in their own research?
Wow. So I would say we should not use AI machine learning for the sake of using machine learning for our study. So basically, we should find the right method that serves our analytical purpose. We should not try not to use some fancy tools to pretend you're working on something really great. For instance, but in analytical work, there are lots of applications. For instance, my colleague Steven, he's applying the machine learning to analyze satellite imageries. Or I know some of my friends, especially in this meeting too, in Junko, is developing the model that can classify whether certain scientific journal articles involve certain proliferation risk or not. In my case, I have to think about in the future what kind of research I'm going to use, but my immediate goal, maybe sometime next year, I want to analyze comprehensively the North Korean AI industry from how their legal framework has been changed to promote informatization of the country, and at the entity level, who are the main players in North Korea promoting AI technologies, and what are their collaboration with the foreign universities. They may yield certain sanctions-related implications as well. Also, at the item level, I want to look into some of their military-related North Korean studies, and in which area they're using AI for their research. Of course, in this process, some of the machine learning technique could be used to analyze AI industry as well. But of course, as I said, you should not overkill your purpose by trying to adopt certain fancy method. But it's always, once you find something that your process, analytical process can be expedited or facilitated by the AI method, then definitely you should use it. And then you can find the right method by consulting with someone who knows, like a Stephen here.
Very good. Yeah, Lauren, I think we have some questions online.
We have Kevin Hunter raising his hand.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
First off, just want to say thank you for the presentation. It's very illuminating. My question is, given all this information, do you think that it would have to be packaged and messaged in a different way in order for like the layperson in America to kind of accept this idea that we should move towards a more strategic empathy-like approach to North Korea? And specifically what I'm thinking about is like economic sanctions and maybe easing some of those up. And the fear that might come from that, and if they get a bigger economy, they could develop nuclear weapons and threaten our allies and the United States.
Sorry, I didn't hear clearly, but
Yeah, I might be able to help here. So kind of the question was, what kind of combined sort of comment and question is one is sort of whether you think the sort of the sort of, let's say the explaining sort of U.S. positions, for example, within for especially from a public consumption standpoint, might need to be packaged in a different way to kind of to let's say move things forward. But kind of related to that, if let's say there's sort of a exploring possibly easing sanctions and explaining this, say, to the U.S. public, there may be a fear though that if you have economic development, that's just going to provide more funding for North Korea's nuclear development activities. And so I think this ties in fairly closely with your policy consideration one, sort of the level of outreach that might be needed.
yeah, of course.
But that was basically it, is sort of the packaging of if there is, let's say, a change in U.S. policy or position, do you see that as a need to sort of package that in a different way for public consumption based on what you've learned here?
You mean how if can reformulate the North Korean policy and then what would be our approach, or also take into account public sentiment?
I think it's taking into account the public sentiment, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we can definitely reformulate the North Korean policy based on considering all the facts that I presented today. But what I want to emphasize is not a short-term goal that we can achieve. We should take it as a long-term perspective. National interest does not change really quick. So there's a long-term education or public outreach. And so when it comes to sanctions, it can definitely, I think, help, let's say lifting sanctions can help to facilitate the conversation with North Korea, but it cannot be a solution at all because it doesn't touch on the major security concerns held by North Korea at all. So even one thing that I think more effort are needed in this actually when it comes to sanctions is that people just talk about lifting sanctions without specifying what measures could be taken. Like even when I engage with certain policymakers in South Korea, they are from the Democratic Party saying we have to lift the sanctions. Sanctions will not work at all. But like, what kind of sanctions are you talking about? Like within sanctions, there are lots of measures, but some of the sanctions measures will not be taken until North come back to NPT as a non-nuclear state. For instance, when you're looking into joint plan of action like a JCPOA, Iranian nuclear deal, actually the sanctions lifting was happening as a gradually. And when it comes to nuclear-related trade restriction, it only happens, lifting those measures only happens when Iran was confirmed as a state in full compliance with NPT and so on. So there's not just, we need more study about details. It's the policy, sometimes policymakers just, they broadly define their policy, but I think that we need more detailed management of their package. And of course, repackaging policy might be work. But anyway, my view is that we should think
Good. Lauren, do we have any other questions online?
Not yet. I think we had some other ones.
Yeah, sure. So I think Moscow.
So thank you so much. It's really interesting, and we have had some conversation on this topic throughout the year. So not really question, but my comments and my thoughts. And I agree that to me, I wish we live in a different world. The situation is better, but I really don't see any solution at this point. Especially you mentioned some similarity in terms of the negative security assurance between Japan and North Korea, but to me, there is no room for collaboration or anything whatsoever under the current situation. Especially, it's more deep-rooted, and especially for Japan, unless there is any development on abduction issue, then Japan will never, never change. But with that said, I fully agree that this requires a long-term some effort. Especially now, the recent trilateral summit among the US, Japan, South Korea, the relationship is hardening. So I really don't see the short-term solution. But as you may know, some efforts by the civil society movement, for example, although security experts almost laugh at the idea of Northeast Asia nuclear conflict zone, but it still exists, and especially the Nagasaki Research Center, and they engage North Korean experts. Mm-hmm. So although some people are kind of laughing at that kind of effort, but we really shouldn't give up, and really need to do some need to make more efforts to engage the civil society. Needs to
I completely agree with you. I mean, you have a hope, you have a certain desired end state in your mind, so you want to make effort toward it.
Mm-hmm.
So but I also at the same time, we also need to think about the issues in reality, as I talked about. US did not sign the Bangkok Treaty and so on. So we have to think about how we solve the problems in reality, how we address the concerns of the United States, or how to find a certain optimal point that balance the national interests of every enemies. So that was your comment there.
Yeah, that's kind of.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to. my main point is that we should not be an alchemist. So alchemists, as a means of transferring the value, they want to make a gold from the metals. They want to convert the metals to gold. But they have a goal, but they didn't have a thorough investigation about the reality. So their actions conform to their goal, but it didn't yield any, there's no realization, it didn't yield any meaningful progress in reality. So because it's not based on the science. So what you have to think of is we know the complete denuclearization of Korean Peninsula, we don't achieve it. We should not let hope invalid, but we also need to think about all the hard facts in real difficulties and how we address those things instead of just ignoring it or turn the blind eye. That's my view.
Well, Musk actually kind of took my question, so I guess, they say great minds think alike and all that. But I was gonna ask about the idea of a Northeast Asian nuclear open free zone treaty. Because I was glad that you brought up the Bangkok Treaty, because I think that that's a really instructive example, and Dr. Potter, correct me if I'm wrong, but the reason none of the P5 have neither signed nor ratified it is because they're still in consultations with ASEAN, because the Bangkok Treaty doesn't allow for any reservations to the protocols, and for the P5, that's a major sticking point, because in every other free zone treaty, all the P5 have put in reservations when they signed in and deposited the protocols, basically stipulating that, yes, we won't, threaten use of nuclear weapons unless, this happens, right? It takes away from traditional, irrevocable, universally legally binding security assurance, except for the Bangkok Treaty, but that's why it hasn't happened yet. And so I'd be curious, what the North Koreans have said, if anything, about the ongoing process of trying to get the nuclear weapon states to ratify the Bangkok Treaty, and how valuable they may see that, or instructive for their own cause of having a Northeast Asian free zone treaty, because I agree with Moscow that it's often sort of talked about and kind of laughed out of the room as just implausible, because both, the three main countries, right? North Korea has nuclear weapons, and South Korea and Japan benefit from US nuclear weapons, so it just isn't possible. But in the absence of anything else, and like you said, it'd be very hard to get some sort of a unconditional NSA pledge for just North Korea without basically making everybody else angry. That it may actually be easier to make a free zone treaty in some alternate universe, 20 years from now, like you said, long term, than it would just get something with the NSA type deal. And so I'm just curious if you found anything in your research about
Well, actually, it's a very good point. Actually, it's worthwhile to explore what actually North Korea stated about the nuclear free zone in other regions of the world. But I haven't looked into their narratives about it yet. But based on voting record, they actually vote in favor for most of the resolution concerning nuclear free zone in other regions on this globe. So when it comes to your security, it's important not to sign something. But when it comes to other securities, it's to say, oh, we want to see peace. It's a reality. So I don't know, maybe I'm too pessimistic, but so like NATO state, they say, oh, we want to see the world without nuclear weapon, but we have nuclear weapon because of practical reasons. So it's a reality. So I don't know, but anyway, so it's a really good point. It's worthwhile to really explore that part. I haven't thought about it.
Yeah,
maybe we can work in together later.
Yeah, I just want to, Sig, you turned your camera on. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I was wondering, did you have a comment or question for Hyuk?
Well, now that you've put me on the spot, I guess
Just your camera is on right there.
Yeah, so a couple of comments and a question. So first of all, I think you did a very nice piece of academic work in the analytics of which you looked at, like the UN voting. But I must say, just as the first that I've seen the results, I would need to spend a lot more time to study that, to see what it really tells me. It more or less confirmed a lot of my sort of gut understanding of what happens at the UN, but I'm not sure. But nevertheless, the fact that you did it and went through all of that, I think is very useful. And I look forward to looking at it in greater detail. Second is I commend your sort of taking the strategic empathy approach, to trying to understand the other side. Jim Lamson, who's also on the online version here, headed a project in which Bob Carlin and I looked at strategic empathy from a North Korea standpoint. Hana Note and Sarah Bidgood looked at Russia, and Jim looked at Iran. And we had a lot of fun, being able to look at those different cases, the different countries, and trying to understand, particularly using Zachary Shore's sort of approach to strategic empathy and the importance of pattern changes. So in our work, and we wrote 2 long reports on North Korea that I think Jim is still working on how to get them published. But the essence of those reports was, and of the study, was that we look at this as saying, as we look at North Korea-U.S. relations, we've had 2 major times, and there was a pattern change in 1990 where Kim Il-sung decided to seek normalization with the United States, and we claim that held for 30 years through all 3 Kims. Into 2020, 2021. And during that period, I guess I would say we come up with a little different sort of recommendation than you do, where you say, the important thing at a negative security insurance, we would view that just as one of several things, with the important aspect being normalization. That's what they were looking for. And just the security piece alone, and the security piece, of course, is much broader than just negative, security assurances, is important, but it's not sufficient. There are economic factors, there are other factors, and we had an opportunity, and I covered much of that of that 30 years in my book, Hinge Points. We had an opportunity multiple times to try to take advantage of trying to get there with the North Koreans. And in the end, we didn't, one president, one administration after another. So that's one comment. And in terms of negative assurance, security assurances, yes, they're important, but they're not necessarily even the most important. There are other things. That was the first 30 years. Then by just around January of 2022, we think there was another pattern change. And this time the pattern change with Kim Jong-un deciding that the time to seek normalization with the United States is over. It's done. And instead, he's going to go back and to essentially align himself and his country with Russia and with China. And so again, so our view now is the negative security assurance don't mean anything to the North Koreans. You can hand them those on a platter. They're not interested. They've decided strategically to go in a very different direction. So nevertheless, I mean, your comments and what you found, is important, and one should be ready perhaps to take a different approach next time around. But right now, that's not what's going to make the North Koreans talk to the Americans. They're not interested in talking. So anyway, that's just my view also from a strategic empathy point of view, but our strategic empathy is guided much more by personal interactions rather than by AI and machine learning. Interactions, visit, and those sorts of things. And so we may not capture it all, but that's our view. That's my comment.
So basically, my assumption was that I know North Korea will never give up nuclear weapon. It's my view. Let's say you suffer for like 30 years or whatever under the political pressure by international society, US antagonizing your country. You went through all this hardship and you eventually made nuclear weapons. and why you suddenly give up? Because someone is being nice to you, it will not enough. So my assumption, as I said, my assumption was that if it is not the lowest cost, then we have to think about, let's say, when it engage with North Korea for the future denuclearization process, then the NSA will be one of the core elements of the such process. And this is very important, especially when you define the process of the complete denuclearization of Korean Peninsula, to which many South Koreans will not accept the NSA pledges by the United States. So we have to, so it is one of very important issue, but of course, as you say, economic issues are important, also other political rapprochement and so forth. But still, I believe that national security issues is the overriding factor to other economic interests and so forth. It could be my bias, but anyway, it will be discussed. That's my view. So.
Yeah, Laura.
We have one more question from Chad Williams online.
Good afternoon. So if I can introduce myself, I'm U.S. Army Major Chad Williams, and I appreciate being able to participate in this remotely, such a distinguished group of presenters. My question stems from my experience back in 2018. I had a unique opportunity to participate as the junior most member of the United Nations Command negotiation team in the combined or the Comprehensive Military Agreement follow-on negotiations. During those negotiations, it was my assessment, and I speak some Korean, at least for a gringo, as well as one can. And it was my assessment that the North Korean delegation did come to bargain in good faith. Their demeanor, the outputs, the do-outs that we produced persuaded me that they were there to negotiate in earnest. In the years that followed and the failure of the Hanoi summit, you invoked the Latin for the situation has changed, and I won't attempt to pronounce it, but I agree that there's very little prospect for substantive engagement on CVID. CVID was the crux of what broke that negotiation, and our insistence on that as a precondition for dropping sanctions or really any other diplomatic engagement, I think, is the proximate and underlying cause of that negative outcome. What I'd like to ask from you, Drs. Kim, Hecker, anyone really in the room, is what policy recommendations you would offer for principals who are trying to achieve some of these normalization goals in the region, as our ceiling, as best case scenario is we normalize relations and reduce the chances for a negative nuclear outcome. What sort of guidance would you give a policymaker, whether that's an ambassador, military negotiator, et cetera, on the value of maintaining our current sanctions regime, which have failed to produce our deterrence objectives in any real way? And I apologize for how tortured that setup is for the question, but turn it over to you. Thank you again.
Thank you so much for your comment and question, Chad. But first of all, I think CVID, complete and irreversible denuclearization of North Korea, is a different concept from complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, because the former is the unilateral disarmament of North Korea. The later, where there's so many interpretations exist, as I said. So, for the UN, I do not have specific policy recommendations, but definitely lifting some sanctions that concerns sectoral bans, such as ban on trade of coal, or ban on trade of fishery product, or ban on trade of like a food or your clothes, whatever. Almost every sector in this industrial sector is prohibited in terms of when you trade in North Korea. Meanwhile, so I think some of the lifting the sanctions related to those industry, like a general just industry, will be helpful, but it will never be solution. It will be helpful in creating a good environment where you can at least ease the sense of tension to start negotiating, start talking to North Korea. But as I said, without addressing the core national security interests of both sides, it will never lead to solutions. So, but at this point, lifting the sanctions in the sectoral ban will be helpful. In the meantime, there should be certain discussions within the United States government, because what US accused of North Korea is that North Korea makes money from those international trading, even if it does not involve the dual use of military goods. They funnel that money to nuclear or ballistic missile program. The thing is, where is the evidence? Of course, maybe there could be some clandestine activities or some classified information could exist. But there is a more general accusation raised by United States that there's sanctions on industrial sector as well. So we should think about whether it is true or if lifting certain those sanctions on civilian area could help ease certain North Korean concerns about their economic situation, so that it can a little bit loosen up the tensions. But if anyone has your view, I'll be welcome to appreciate.
Yeah, and kind of with that in mind, we might have to move offline here. So I think we've already sort of kind of reached the 150 number. I think I should probably make sure that we've got. Oh, we do have until 2. I apologize. So I was a little worried that we might need the room. So don't want to provide sort of an artificial stop here. But any comments, questions, Bill?
Yeah, just you asked me earlier, and I wasn't prepared at the time. I'm not sure how useful this observation is, but there seems to be, somewhat of a disconnect here in terms of your findings from more quantitative analysis, and then your discussion of the roadblocks that you face. Because if I were to look at the voting records, in fact, the clusters that you find are clusters involving, the United States, Russia, nuclear weapon states, and then you find the overwhelming number of other countries in the non-aligned movement take a very different stand. And yet, when you look at the obstacles to kind of moving forward, you don't see the cooperation, certainly today, involving the United States and Russia, the United States and China. And so one has to ask, what is the relevance of the voting records in the United Nations? I mean, are we really, in fact, what are we observing here is simply the distinction between those countries that possess nuclear weapons and those that don't possess nuclear weapons. And so it's somewhat puzzling. I mean, I think there's some interesting things that you point out in terms of the distance, between states. You've been able to generate through your data analytical work. On the other hand, one could infer from that same kind of analysis, if you were to look at the distances between the United States and Russia, you find that they're actually quite close or not? I don't think they are, but maybe on nuclear weapons issue. There's a different.
This is for the nuclear weapons issue.
A different answer to the question. So I do think it at least raises the issue of what do you in fact derive from an analysis of UN voting?
First of all, my critics, I didn't maybe fully explain, but we should not assume that our non-proliferation standard is a universal standard. It's our policy that we tend to identify our values with others. It's very, for instance, maybe I put on the slide that American value is a value for the humankind, so we have to promote it, like what Woodrow Wilson said. So it's standard notion that some sort of missionary, at the same time, someone who tend to identify that, like Pax Americana or Pax Britannia and so on. So we are not the majority. We are what we are pursuing. We have to think about whether what we pursue is to assure ourselves that no other states are developing nuclear weapons. Or do you really believe that if it's global community interest in promoting non-proliferation? So let's say some states who are already implementing nuclear weapons, implementing their non-proliferation obligations really hard. And then the Western countries come and say, oh, you have to implement additional protocol as well. Then is it actually good for them, or it solves our nuclear weapon state interest that all feel assured that, oh, they're taking even more measures so that we don't have to worry about other states developing nuclear weapons. So actually, so that's why the whole point, the United States is a minority. We are the minority. And then current international order serves our interests better than definitely non-aligned movement or majority interests. That's why I criticize at the beginning that someone says nuclear weapon, non-proliferation, nuclear safety, and nuclear security are good for everyone. Why don't you work on harder? So it's kind of very Western mindset that, oh, what do you think is good for others too? So, but my point is to a different level. So we have to admit that in reality, many states have their different varying social agenda, even if some people may not believe it, or it's reality. So that's why I wanted to show that what we believe is not a universal value. So credit for those who promote the rule-based international.
Man. I recently read a study that was focused on identifying points between the US and Russia where they could collaborate diplomatically based on fighting common threats. And the study found that they were not cooperating diplomatically to the extent that they could because of underlying bias and prejudice and the emotionalization of the relationship over time. And I wonder if your study, when you were speaking about the disconnect between what was found, like these are points where we could cooperate, but when you look out in the real world, no one's cooperating, and there's not a chance that they're going to cooperate. I'm wondering what the effect could be of what you emphasized in the first part of your study about backing off from the morality of these issues and focusing more on the legal aspects of the just the non-emotionalized or non-populist aspects of the issues. And I don't even know if that is possible in this environment, especially not with the US, who's so determined to call people, right, or countries or regimes people. We're a big part of that problem, I think, in making it a question, but I really did appreciate that part of your presentation, and I'll stop there.
Yeah, sometimes we have to also be critical about ourselves too. Like it's human beings, like a tendency that we sometimes think what you're doing is always good, or we take our system as a good one by default. So I think we always need to be critical of it also.
If you want to look positively, though, positive conclusion here, one has to, I think, also recognize that there are some issues, such as the additional protocol, where there's actually much greater consensus than you may think, based upon this analysis. And I don't know the precise numbers, but a majority of non-aligned members, in fact, have signed the issue, parties. And they may disagree about whether it should be a kind of gold standard with respect to safeguards. And they disagree whether it should be mandatory or voluntary. But if you actually just look at the numbers, the majority of NAM countries taking the stance consistent with the United States and the Russian Federation, and United Kingdom and France with respect to the initial protocol. So some things are not as obvious as they might appear from the statistical analysis.
But I think we have to think about whether those non-aligned movement states signed the additional protocol voluntarily or some sort of under the political pressure or some peer pressure. When you're looking into this isolate one state as one, then they may want to sign it, but there could be definitely peer pressure, and then once they sign it, then they take it as a kind of, oh, we already signed it, so we promote it. But there's good, you mentioned about the standards. So I remember at IAEA, certain general conference, they tried to adopt a resolution that include a phrase that integrated safeguard, which is include both comprehensive nuclear safeguard plus additional protocol as a non-proliferation standard. They tried to include that phrase, but it was rejected by the most of the state, non-aligned state. So we can see that we should not assume that our standard is a global standard. Yeah, so that's my comment.
All right. Well, I think we have reached here the conclusion, and just great discussion. I think it's rare sometimes we have a seminar that will actually go to the very end, and so I think it's a sign of the interest that your research and the topics that you shared has driven. So thank you so much. Again, just give it
Thank you so much.